Great. We're going to talk about streets, about how they're built, what they're made for, and how they relate to climate and how they relate to infrastructure funding. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go into presentation mode. So I want to start with the question, how do you use the streets? Think about a trip that you have made. And every time that you are outside of a building, i.e. largely on the streets, I want you to think through each of the ways that you use the street on the way from A to B. So on my way from inside my house to the meeting I went to today, what were the ways that you used the streets? Type them in the chat. How do you use our streets? Walking the dog, biking to work. I recently learned how to roller skate. I'm one of those pandemic people. All right. Drive, walk, basketball, love that. Getting to work, seeing family. Dogs, walking, using sidewalks, going to a second line. There's a lot of different ways. Yeah, rolling in a parade. Yes, indeed. So we use our streets, in my opinion, more in New Orleans and for more things than anywhere else I've ever lived. I'm a native of Baltimore. I've been here in New Orleans for about 10 years. Here's an example of a street in New Orleans. This is Wall Boulevard at Holiday Drive in Algiers. Of the things that we talked about being able to do on our streets, what things can you imagine doing here? What are the features of this street? If I'm walking across the street, how does this feel? If I'm driving or biking, is there a way for me to get around without a car or a bike? Point out what you see. I see a big neutral ground. What else do you see?
Sidewalk, crosswalk.
We see, yeah, no sidewalk. We see a pretty hard to see crosswalk. Bike lane, I'd be afraid to use. There's a car in it. All right, there's a canal that looks like it might be a little unsafe. There's no shoulder to pull over in. Yeah. So the city of New Orleans made improvements to this street to look like this. This is the same street. Now what do you see?
Paint.
Paint. Bunch of paint.
Protected bike lane.
We see a protected bike lane. There's some actual improvements. Yes, definitely love that. Still don't see a sidewalk. So that's a challenge. We're not seeing a ton of stormwater capture features. You can see that the land is higher up than the road. There's nowhere for the water to go. Great. So this is an example of some complete streets improvements, and maybe not all the ones that we need for our street to be actually complete. Y'all did a really good job. You passed the pretest. So my presentation we're calling Whose Streets? Anybody ever been to a protest? Our Streets. The New Orleans, with the New Orleans Complete Streets Coalition. We are a coalition of over 30 members, representing organizations that care about people's health and mobility and safety. We have representatives of organizations from the American Heart Association to Ride New Orleans to Bike Easy to Girl Trek. Really, anybody who's interested in safety on our streets and our streets being built intentionally to share is a member of the coalition. So what is a complete street? Y'all nailed this already. It's a street that's designed to be safe and accessible for all modes of transportation. That includes pedestrians, cyclists, public transit users, and motorists. That's people driving cars. That means that the street is designed with the needs of everyone in mind, not just those folks who drive cars. I always start Complete Streets Coalition presentations with this photo. It is my personal why for why I am involved in advocating for complete streets. This photo was taken on March 2nd, 2019 at an Endymion parade party. You can see me there. I'm the co-chair right there in the blue silly thing. And 2 hours after this photo were taken, I was the only person who remained alive in this photo. Both Cherie on the left and David on the right were killed by a drunk driver who ran into our group of friends riding bikes on Esplanade Avenue, going 80 miles an hour, killing these two, and injuring 12 and hitting 12 cars. What somebody told me in the moments after that, I'll bring back our definition, was that people make really bad choices sometimes. And as a city, we can't necessarily stop people, every person, from making a bad choice. I could not have stopped that man from drinking too much to drive and then driving. But we can design our streets to be more, to keep people safer from one another's decisions. Not all of our uses of the streets are compatible with the way that some of our streets look. To go back here, it's not compatible with walking. It's not compatible with a lot of the ways of moving around. And so it's literally life or death. We'll talk a little bit more about sort of the actual stats and figures around safety and these things, but that's how I come to this conversation. I know that a lot of traumas have happened in these streets and not just from cars. This is my why. Here's some examples of complete streets that I just wanted to cruise through. These are recent improvements that the city has made in the last 5 years to some of our streets. This was a massive improvement on Orleans Avenue. They moved the parking, they rearranged where the bike lanes would go and put both bike lanes on the same side of the street. It includes crosswalks, it includes bike lanes, it includes sidewalks where there's a desire line. This part of, you can see where there's no leaves here in between these two posts where people have been walking. That's called a desire line. It means people don't want to walk around, they want to walk right there. So putting a sidewalk there helps people, and helps people who aren't able to walk on 2 feet and use a wheelchair to get through more easily. It also means, in a lot of our cases, just paving the street better or planting trees. More improvements across the city. All right. So the benefits of complete streets. They are many. At the Complete Streets Coalition, we are focused on equity, safety, health, and climate concerns. We'll start with equity. Did you know that 24% of New Orleanians do not have access to a car? That means they're having to figure out a different way to get around other than a car, to get to work, to get to the grocery store, to get to their mama's house, or wherever folks need or want to go. That's a significant portion of New Orleanians who are facing a reality of, this is a map showing how many jobs are reachable within 30 minutes of driving. So for that 70-ish% of New Orleanians who do have access to a car, they can reach pretty much every job within 30 minutes. By comparison, on transit, almost no jobs accessible within 30 minutes of a combined transit and walking trip. This is considering our rates of service midday, so at our peak service in October of 2022. And it's not that much better when you think about taking 60 minutes on transit. The reality is our transportation options are not sufficient to meet the needs of people moving around our region. And that has a disparate effect on folks based on their race and where they live. You can see here, this graph is a little harder to read. It's the percentage of jobs accessible by transit at midday, by race, and by parish. And so you can see here, we're in the middle in Orleans. Only about 40% of jobs can be accessed by sorry, I'm confusing myself with this graph. You can see there's a gap here between the numbers on white workers in Orleans and Black workers in Orleans, which means that this is not evenly spread out throughout our neighborhoods, and it's impacting some folks more strongly than others. So on safety, New Orleans has one of the highest rates of pedestrian fatalities in the country. The state of Louisiana is 5th in the country for bike and pedestrian fatalities. And that number has been staying steady, if not increasing. In Orleans Parish, we are the 2nd highest number of traffic fatalities in the state, only behind Baton Rouge. You can see that's both people who are driving cars and pedestrians. What a complete street does is it slows down the traffic often. So it's also safer for people who are driving a car. This number was a little shocking for me, and I just wanted to underline it to bring it home and make this a little more personal and real here. I spoke at a protest a few days after my friends died, talking about complete streets and the need to really emphasize this in our planning. And I said, their deaths should be the last ones, but they won't be. And they weren't. Since that, 4 years ago on March 2nd, 200 people have died in traffic fatalities in New Orleans. That was around here, all that. And this was from an article in NOLA.com that was published in October. So this is really a matter of life or death for folks, and traffic collisions are a public health crisis for the city. Of course, there are other health benefits that come along with active transportation. We are also one of the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease in the country, and active transportation options are way more likely to be utilized when there's a safe place to do it, and can reduce risk of these diet-related diseases really significantly. I thought this picture was very funny because it's a picture of somebody riding their bicycle on what is a generally pretty well-designed street. There's a bike lane. There's a sidewalk, but there's just one problem. Can you point it out? Somebody, I know you're all seeing it.
It's a little bit of water.
There's a little bit of water. Yeah, so the other major function that our streets play in the city of New Orleans is as a drainage conduit. Our pumps and systems of water management are designed to move water from the streets to the pumps out to the lake. They need the street in order to get the water there. So there's a lot of components in terms of storm resilience for New Orleans and complete streets that we need to consider that aren't considered elsewhere. There are no trees on this street. An adult tree can drink like 1,000 gallons of water a day. That would go a long way. There are a lot of paved surfaces, so there's nowhere else for the water to go. I'm not seeing any grass. I'm not seeing any permeability. So that's another component of complete streets that's really important for New Orleans for climate. Of course, as the climate warms and sea levels rise and weather trends get a lot more dramatic, there is an increased desire as well to slow down our use of fossil fuels, right? If there are safe and complete streets and it's easy to get around by transit, shared mobility, by bike or by walking, we can cut down on fossil fuel burning significantly, making not only our health, our respiratory health as a city better, but also our climate health and safety. The city of New Orleans has a lot of plans about safety, and about complete streets, and it's a really exciting time to be aware of and plugged into what these plans say. There's the Moving New Orleans Action Plan. This was the City of New Orleans transportation plan that they published in 2019 and then updated in 2021. I have a link to it here, and we can dive into it if y'all, if we have time remains. We'll also send out the links afterwards. There's the RTA's Strategic Mobility Plan. That is the RTA's overall guiding document that guides their annual planning and budgeting decisions. Right now, they're looking at this plan for updates, and you can provide your feedback on their website, which we'll send out after the training. And finally, the City of New Orleans also has a bikeway blueprint. They made a plan with significant community engagement and input on where our bike lanes need to be safer and where they need to be more connected so that people can easily and safely get around by bicycle in the city of New Orleans. So why do these things matter right now? You've heard me say already, and you've heard Caroline say at the top of the meeting, that more infrastructure funding is for that most infrastructure funding is coming down the pike now, and most of it is for transportation. You can see here in new funding under the new Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the vast majority of it, this top line, is for transportation. That means there's a great opportunity for us in New Orleans to improve our transportation infrastructure and make our streets built to share. We do have an ordinance in the city of New Orleans that the Complete Streets Coalition helps to uphold. It is called the Complete Streets Ordinance. And it requires that anytime we dig up a street or amend a street, you have to consider all users when you're redesigning the street. That means people who are walking, people who are using a wheelchair or pushing a stroller, as well as people who are biking, driving, or taking transit. Most of those plans that will be submitted for funding will come from one of these existing plans. In order to build something with federal funds, you usually have to have a plan already. And so we are seeing city agencies and city departments really draw on their existing legwork in order to build plans. Getting aware of those sorts of things, and also being aware of how your streets feel, will really help put us in a really great position to leverage this funding and put it where it needs to go. That was a lot. Do we have any questions?
Wow.
Nelly, I want to say that if you don't mind, it was shocking to me the numbers that of people who were fatalities. I didn't know we ranked so high as a city, like #2 in the state, and you say #5 in what that number was pertaining, and that's it. I want to add.
The state of Louisiana is 5th in the nation for highest number of traffic fatalities.
You know if that number is per
capita?
Yeah. If not,
I believe that it is.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. I can
Wow.
check on that, and
Yeah.
we can send it out with the notes.
And if you want to say something, you could, put it in the chat. I think Tyler, I think you were about to say something, and someone else was maybe about to jump in. Feel free. If you want to stay off camera, that's fine. But the conversation, the floor is open.
Everybody's so quiet.
I was just going to say, Nelly, thank you for bringing up that the streets are actually designed to flood. Most people don't know that. 50% of people in our community engagement leads did not know that. And that, it's just insanity that we take our second, if not first, most expensive asset and put it in the street on any given day. That needs, everything points to transit and mobility as such a critical structural solution to so many of our issues. And I just want to evangelize alongside you. This is a great presentation.
We'll hear from Robert, and then I'll share just one more little tidbit before we hand it back to Caroline.
Hey, gang. Hey, Nelly. Thanks. I wonder if you could tell us about some of the reasons we got here in New Orleans and cities across the U.S. Why our streets are like this, and what some of the challenges are towards transforming them towards the kinds of streets that we would prefer to see, that you showed us some examples of. And sure. I know it's a little off the cuff. You probably don't have a presentation prepared for it, but I bet you've got some of this in your head.
I don't. I have a little bit of it in my head, and perhaps you with your urban planning experience can bring in some more resources from what you know. We, in the grand scheme of things, our streets were built for carts, for horses and bicycles. Over time, the United States built out much more significant reliance on cars with the interstate transit system, and the individual property of having a car being a really common and like part of American dream, of American pride. We're seeing a lot more and a lot bigger cars on our streets over the decades. My grandmother had a Model T Ford. That two of those would have fit perfectly fine down Urquhart Street. But what I'm watching right now out my side window is an F-150 trying to take with an old Suburban, both trying to pass each other at the same time. And what do they have to do? Same thing we all have to do, pull over. And I'll speak to one other thing, which is that there's a lot of different entities that deal with our streets. In New Orleans, we have a lot of state highways. For example, St. Claude Avenue, Broad Street. Those are two big ones that are Claiborne Avenue, are all actually state highways. So they're not managed by the city of New Orleans. They're managed in partnership with the Department of Transportation for the state, the DOTD. So there's a lot of different entities that have to touch these things, and they are massive undertakings. Yeah, they're state highways. Hain, I'm hearing, is maybe also a state highway. So there's a lot of different management from that. The other thing that keeps progress from happening very often is people's reliance on their cars. I talked with neighbors about why they don't use transit. And what I heard was, well, it doesn't come enough, and it's not safe, and it doesn't take me where I want to go. And it's not convenient for me. Well, those things aren't antithetical to transit. They're just not built into our system because we emphasize cars. We at the Complete Streets Coalition believe that we can share better than we're sharing now. I don't know if that answered your question, Robert, but I gave my classism definitely pays a part to stage.
Yeah,
gave my
nice
best.
job. Nice job. Thank you.
Sure.
So here's a left field. What's the psychological impact at the community level?
Of unsafe streets. I can speak at my level. I don't have a like full rundown of the mental health statistics of New Orleans. I will say that I, with my 10 years in New Orleans, did not feel like a New Orleanian until I was diagnosed with PTSD. Because we have trauma here from storms, from violence, from traffic fatalities, from loss. We live with these things here more than most, and often don't get the service and care that we need. I am sitting right now in a room that faces both St. Roch Avenue and Urquhart Street. And since I started counting 4 years ago, there have been 14 car crashes in front of my house. That has its impact on people. It has impact on neighborhood character because, for example, I don't sit on my stoop because it faces the corner and it's an unsafe corner. But that means we're missing out on one another. We're missing out on one another's company. When I worked at the Lafitte Greenway, there were folks in the Iberville neighborhood who live right there next to the Greenway, but they said, my kids aren't crossing Claiborne to get to the playground. It's keeping us from each other and from the things that we need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. You are way more like, I tell people who visit here all the time, you are way more likely to be injured by traffic than you are to be injured by violent crime in New Orleans. Statistically, that's true. But it's not always what we read.
Hey, Nellie, on that note, can I ask you a little micro question?
Sure. I might have an answer.
You said you talked to your neighbors about why they prefer to drive, why they would rather not take public transit and maybe some other forms. And one of the reasons you said they gave was safety. Did they break down whether they were afraid of a public transit crash or they were afraid of being a victim of violence on public transit? Did they make that specification?
No, although it didn't seem like to me, based on like sort of how the conversation was going, that people were talking about crashes. I think that bus crashes are relatively infrequent. Does anybody know a stat on this? It seems like they're
Yeah,
Pretty rare.
public transit, mass transit in general is exponentially safer than driving.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
Hey, Robert, and Natalie, if I may chime in on that, been born and raised in New Orleans, raised in New Orleans, I like to say, riding the bus is seem like as you're poor or as not having in New Orleans, a lot. And so if you see me riding the bus or ride my bike, somebody asks me, am I right or do I need a ride? You know, that's typical we get from in New Orleans. So you have a class of people that's really like it's socioeconomic factors, the people who have to walk in New Orleans East that has built for cars that don't have connections. And so you criticize people that crosses the highway and run across the highway because there's no connection. Or myself used to go under the canal, under the bridge to get from one side to the next, from my apartment to the barber shop on Plaza Drive. And so I like the fact that it was the complete streets, and you have to consider all people, and that alleviates some classism. But we have to educate people to let them know that it's okay to ride the bus. David Letterman rode the subway, so you know.
Julia, you're on mute. Nellie, you're also.
Karen
I
added
love-
some great context for us in the chat.
Oh, nice.
Very few accidents on buses. There are cameras inside and outside each bus, and police assigned to RTA. So get out there and ride transit. A friend of mine, I will leave you with this. A friend of mine made a habit of doing bus brunch every week. He and his partner would go to brunch somewhere different, and they would take the bus to get there. If you are not a regular transit rider, try it out. Check out what's going on. We need more people to use the bus or streetcar in order for these things to improve and to advocate for them to improve.
It's amazing. I think we should have like remember there was like this bike to work movement kind of thing going. I feel like public transit deserves that treatment because I think it is culture change and behavior change are so intrinsically linked. And I think Sage Michael's point is very pointed about riding the bus. When we were having some of these ARPA conversations that Nellie helped to catalyze, someone brought up that all New Orleans school children were given, free bus, you could ride the bus for free as a child under 18. And that went away and that changed people's behavior and thinking about the bus. It used to be a real critical way that kids would even get to school in lieu of formal school busing. So I'm learning more and more and more about transit in New Orleans. And I would love to declare a week in the fall, maybe that that is public ride the bus week or something like that. So people just give it a taste of it.
It exists. There is
Yeah.
a Ride Transit Week. Ride New Orleans, our local transit advocacy organization, and my co-chair of the coalition who leads Ride, they lead that. I think that it is in the fall. I'll look into that for you, but Ride Transit Week does exist. While I have the floor, I'll just name one other thing, which is that the city's city council and legislators from New Orleans are having a meeting about updates on infrastructure that will include an update about transit and transportation. It's this Friday at 10 a.m. at City Hall. Great place to share your comments and get information about what infrastructure has been applied for and could be coming.
Awesome. What you guys are speaking about reminds me, Sage, you and Gregory and some other partners are leading culture of cleanliness, but we need culture of transit or something much catchier than what I just suggested. But it's fascinating how it boils down to both, the systems and the infrastructure and funding, and then also, this is a great discussion on the other side of that piece. All right, well, we will probably have a few more minutes to keep this conversation going. I'm going to pivot into the second part of our webinar, but really appreciate all of the great questions, the rich conversation. So keep dropping comments in the chat, and we will make sure to visit them. And I'm going to share my screen. And if you hear a dog whining in the backyard, that's my dog. So I apologize. All right. So Nellie just helped us build our knowledge. Now it's time to learn how we can share our stories and contribute our data and experiences to inform these infrastructure funding opportunities coming down, both in securing the money and also in helping the city learn how to plan appropriately. So this week we're talking Complete Streets. We're going to dive into a number of things related to this. We're also going to talk about connecting communities, which I know, Nellie, you've done a lot of work in that. Talking about accessibility. We're really going to go around the board. But first, to ground those who aren't familiar, IC Change is a platform. You can use it on your computer or on your phone. It functions a lot like social media, but instead of sharing your cat, you're going to share potholes or flooding on your street. What we do at IC Change is we connect your data and your experiences to those who are going to help bring solutions to your neighborhood. So bringing these hyper-local, block by block experiences you're having around flooding, trash, lack of bus stops, whatever you're seeing as an issue in your community, or a solution. When you're seeing in your community, we're connecting that to cities, engineers, nonprofits, researchers. In New Orleans, we've been undergoing an effort in the past year. We've been working here for several years. But with this PEP initiative, we are working to learn what priorities people are talking about throughout the city, specifically to inform the funding coming down the line. So people have been talking about trees. Where do we need more trees? Where is it flooding? Where's your energy bill too high? And each story is packed with so much data. So it's not only what you're contributing through your photos, which provide really rich context, and then also metadata through your location. So we're seeing where are hotspots, where are priorities throughout the city, your stories of what you've experienced. So just by writing your experience, that contributes really useful data that we can use to help inform infrastructure funding. And then we're also hooking up with sensors. You can input your own measurements. If you want to be a BrainGauge host or a Measure Heat with us, I'll drop my email in the chat at the end. And each post is also synced to somewhere around 50 different weather measurement points. So we're getting a really holistic sense of not only what you're seeing, what your account is, but also data that's automatically synced to each post. So what we want to do, as we've done in previous weeks, is basically think about our theme, our topic, all of the things Nellie just talked to us about, and let's walk through a few examples of how we can track these things on IC Change. These are all going to look pretty different. We're talking streets, we're talking sidewalks, we're talking bridges and walkways, but this is what some people in the community have been sharing with us. Here we're looking at just a safety issue on a sidewalk. So this alone, just seeing two people trip over a truncated sign, that's something major to flag. It's a concern for public safety. Similarly, I know one of the main pillars of the Complete Streets is accessibility. We want our wheelchair users to be safe. We want anyone to be able to access our streets and our sidewalks. This is also tying in, you'll notice the intersections between themes. When it floods, we've got gravel on the sidewalk. So we're thinking about flooding, we're thinking about how that impacts our accessibility, and we're thinking about those who are most vulnerable to these impacts. This is kind of a reminiscent of a before picture that Nellie was showing of this street looks pretty scary to cross. I'm not seeing a bike lane. I'm not seeing any crosswalks. And we've got someone in New Orleans saying, hey, this is scary. I'm trying to catch the bus here and I don't know where or how to cross this street. So this is tying directly into some of those themes she was just mentioning. This one, a little bit more traumatic, certainly emotional. We have a huge problem with speeding, and this can be some of the damages brought on by that. I know several people were discussing Hain Boulevard in the chat. This might even be a post from Sage, I think. I'm not sure. I don't mean to call you out like that. But this is definitely a huge problem spot for speeding in the city. We've heard that for numbers of people on IC Change and through word of mouth. And it's just one more instance of documenting and showing this as a log of the issues. And the more voices and the more people saying we need a road diet, we need to slow cars down on this street, we can put these records together and make a really compelling story of how many people care, how it's impacting people. And this photo very emotionally tells why it's such an urgent issue. Around accessibility, we were looking earlier at streets that don't have sidewalks. What happens when we have streets that have sidewalks that have been completely overgrown? We're going to be dealing with similar issues if we're not focusing on maintenance when we do improve our streets. So we want to look at where throughout the city are we seeing instances of, forgotten sidewalks, and what are the impacts on that? It's a danger to children who there was no bike lane on this road either. They had several photos in their post. And so the kids they can't bike in the street. That's not safe. They can't bike on the sidewalk. And this is just an issue of maintenance. This is certainly a familiar sight. So potholes come a dime a dozen here. And this person has really called attention to not only the exact location, but what are the impacts of that on both them and what they've seen to others. So back to the bike lanes, if we're seeing potholes on one side of the street, it's really a system issue for the whole street. People will dodge it, and that further endangers bikers. This one also brings in another climate issue. So the last component of what Nellie was talking about was also making climate ready infrastructure. So both infrastructure and the systems around it. So if you're waiting for the bus, but you're, frying like a frying pan, as this person writes, and waiting a long time there, that's not safe either. Even if the bus is safe, even if the streets are right, we have to think about how we're building the spaces for people, so that all of the descriptions we wrote earlier of how we want to spend our time on the streets can be done so safely. Where are we planting trees? This really intersects into a number of issues we want to consider. And, sharing your community knowledge. This person liked the RTA app. They like the bus tracker, which I've heard is quite great. This is also a familiar and common issue throughout the city. This person, I loved the use of the ruler. If you have any citizen scientists in you, come to us, break out your rulers. Tracking subsidence literally down to the centimeter, and showing how this is happening. They had some really interesting observations of how they believe that the actual parts of the road the cars are driving on are experiencing worse subsidence than the bike lanes, which makes sense. And we've also seen people tracking where buses stop. That there are sinkholes and flooding, or not necessarily a sinkhole, but there's subsidence there as well. So looking for these trends can help us understand why our streets are doing this. And then when we plan for improved infrastructure in the future, we're bringing in this knowledge around how cars or buses or bikes may or may not impact a street, especially with climate in mind. Oh, here we go. So this person's noticing that puddling, and they're noticing the heavy buses and the trucks stopping there. So making sure we're thinking ahead when we plan, not just paving things the same way that we already have. And this is back to that complete streets, Nellie was showing. It's not always even a bike lane. It's just a safely paved street, especially in our neighborhoods. I wouldn't want to ride my bike through this. I'm not sure many would. And there are so many streets throughout the city where streets have been paved, but maybe not finished, or if they've been finished, they're, within a few months or years, already depreciated down to a state. And it's not safe, and it's disrupting people's lives, and, road repairs need to be stronger. We're also hearing stories about how people's transit lines have changed over time. So we want to hear, create this community record, building how people have used public transportation in the past, how they're using it today, what's changed, and make requests or recommendations and suggest solutions off of that. This one was a really interesting post, not only flagging the concerns with the street safety, but then also getting into what workforces are we using to work on our streets. So when we think about complete streets and all of the changes we want to strive for, we want to approach this from a perspective of doing things right in every way that we can. So bringing in contractors who are more local, people who work in neighborhoods, giving opportunities back to neighborhoods, and making sure that we have people who are going to finish what they started is really important. So thank you guys for rolling through those with us. Every week we've been doing a challenge. We want to bring you into these conversations. We want to see what are your transportation needs. I think it was Robert who said he was taking the bus or the tram tonight. You're first on deck to share your experience. We were showing some, of the more issue focused, but we also love to champion streets that are beautiful. We love to champion positive experiences with public transit. So these are some prompts, but we really want to think on both sides of that spectrum. You can consider asking yourself, where are you seeing hazardous street conditions? So this is really in line with most of what we talked about tonight. Where do you need a bike lane? Where do you need the street to slow down? You need a road diet. How can we use climate ready public transportation to serve you or your community better? So, not just thinking through, we want more bus routes or we need more bus access, but how are buses stopping on that block impacting flooding? We want to kind of bring everything into that conversation. And another question to consider, thinking back to that connecting communities, is where do you need bridges or improved access around town? You can take this question however you'd like. It could be a literal bridge to connect you from one point to another, or it could be that their curbs are too high and your grandma isn't able to travel across the street because we can't get her wheelchair there. So looking at places that we can further connect community members so that we can all get around town and do the things that we said we like to do on the streets, like go to Second Lines or eat crawfish or walk our dogs. And we all deserve to be able to do that equally. So we have 2 more webinars. I'll just do a few quick admin things and then we can open the discussion back up because we're a few minutes early. We're talking trees and heat next week. These themes have been popping up throughout the course of the series, but we'll focus in a little more there. And then we'll wrap up our virtual series with flooding just in time for rainy season to come in full drive. We're also going to be taking it to the streets. This is just one of several upcoming events we're starting to do. We call them pep walks internally, but I don't know if we've marketed that out to everyone. But Jordan, actually, I'll bring you, if you're still on, you can jump in and describe this if you'd like.
Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm just hanging out. What's up? How's everybody doing? Pep walks. If anybody wants to come join, we have a pep walk next Friday from 4 to 7 in Holly Grove. So we'll be walking around having a community block party, a community cookout at the very end of it. That'll be from 5 to 7. So if you want to come out and do some walking and take a document, some infrastructure, everything we just learned, that'll be happening from 4 on. So that's just a little quick overview. That's happening at Miss Dee community garden over there on Olive in Edinburgh. That's just a little quick rundown. Is that cool?
That's perfect. Thank you.
All right, cool. Thanks, Caroline.
So if you're new to IC Change and you are having a little bit of stage fright of making your first post, this is a great opportunity. You can come out. We're going to be doing a scavenger hunt of sorts, walking around the neighborhood, looking for different sightings, and creating that community record so we can see where improvements needed, and also, champion the community garden, champion all the people in the neighborhood doing a lot of great work to improve their community. So come and join us. Many more of these are going to be coming throughout the month of May and June. So you'll get the information in emails, but this is the first one where we've got the date and the time pinned down. So take a photo, come join us. I think we're going to have a band. It's going to be really fun. And we'd love to all meet up in person.
You sold us much better than I did, Caroline. Thank you.
Wait, oh no. Just anyways, but I will pop this up. If you haven't yet downloaded IC Change, scan this QR code or visit us at ichange.org. You can use it on your computer. It's available in English and Spanish. We would really love to have you join our virtual community and continue this conversation. And it's fascinating to see what people are talking about on your street. So we really advise you to get in there and, let us know what you're thinking about and what solutions you'd like to see. And I will stop talking. And I see there's a lot of stuff in the chat. So if other people had questions, and we can also bring Nellie back into that conversation if we wanted to keep talking on the Complete Streets Coalition's work, and CVNO's work. So yeah, feel free to jump in verbally, or if someone wants to read a question from the chat.
I will just add like one other note on the like things to document on IC change list is, and just really, we hear a lot about problems in our city. Our city has lots of them. It's also really nice to focus on the things that are working and why, so the city knows what we need more of, just as much as what we need to be fixing. I'm actually in Miami for a conference, and Miami Beach has this amazing beach walk, which is, you know, lined with dunes for erosion control and flood control, but it is really packed with bikes and scooters, and like it's almost like the Netherlands, like it's that crowded. And I could see us turning our flood risks into real assets when it comes to mobility. So if there are spots where you're just like, I love this bike route, or I love this bus route, tell us, you know, tell us what's working, as much as we see problems all the time in our town, which it's our town. That's what we do. We love it. We also want it to be better.
Yeah, that sounds great. I know there have been times where certain areas downtown was turned to a pedestrian mall. Like, you know, so it could limit how much traffic actually come in, but that's temporarily. Maybe we could expand that where we could have a square that could be more permanent. One thing about speed bumps, I see in other cities, and as a solution to speed bumps within on city streets. I see that in Atlanta, Georgia, Lithonia, and other parts like that. Can we have speed bumps on our streets in our community like I see in other cities in Orleans Parish? Is that possible as a solution to speed?
I
in
mean,
the
it's
community?
possible. It's not impossible. I don't think there's any ordinances that prohibit it. But Nellie says no.
I don't know if it is possible. I don't frequently see them in New Orleans. And the last time I asked somebody about it for a project, I was told that the Department of Public Works doesn't really like to do speed bumps. I think part of the reason for that is because of subsidence. So because our soils are unstable, like putting a speed bump on a street could end up creating even more calamity and bumpiness.
I did like the
although
comment.
this is my speculation. I do not know
I
whether
feel
this is
like
true.
that's a materials question. I feel oh, emergency vehicles. Okay.
Mr. Arthur said the potholes. He said it earlier in the
I
chat.
think I love that.
All the speed bumps.
Potholes are nature's way of just saying hello. They are great they are great speed bumps. Yeah. People on IC Change have also flagged that they want speed bumps to prevent water from going into people's homes from wakes that are happening in their neighborhoods. There have been actual requests for those. All right, Robert, we'll look forward to seeing your trip.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
When people post to IC Change, how can how do you does IC Change, like, how do you share the information to the city or the engineers or the nonprofits and researchers that are interested or could use this information? Like, who represents the data other than who posts it?
Yes, that's a good question. So we work with those entities who are mandated to work towards public improvements and take community data and put it into public good, public infrastructure, particularly cities or engineering firms. And they have access to what we call the client-side version of IC Change, where they can see the aggregated data all together. We don't publish people's locations on the front end. We want to protect their privacy and we want to protect their, their identities. But on the back end, you can see the aggregated kind of maps and heat maps and trends and keywords that are coming up. We do publish some of those results in our blogs or kind of our email newsletters that folks who are members of IC Change do receive. So we always return on back. And then the cities do, when they do subscribe to us, do comment on IC Change directly to say, hey, you've been heard. So we have just started a direct relationship with the city of New Orleans. It hasn't officially started, but it's happening. It's a small pilot, but we do work that way in the city of Miami and Miami-Dade County and other cities around the country.
I'll just add, I dropped this in the chat, but we're working together for this project to try to pilot where this data can go, what it can say and do. So for this particular project, we'll be releasing those data collectively, probably on all of our websites. Certainly it'll be on CVNO's website, and shared out with community partners, community organizations, and the city itself.
Yeah. And I think, Nellie, actually you're presenting in council on Friday. So hopefully we can join. Yeah. So we're going to keep aggregating all the data throughout the summer, but if you want to chime in now on any of these infrastructure priorities, we are collecting it for presentation to the city.
I just want to add, Healthy Gulf is the project partner with IC Change with this project in New Orleans. So correct me if I'm wrong, any information posted in New Orleans at this time, whether you all come on the PEP project or not, we'll be able to have that access to that data for future references. And so we want to use this as data to advocate for policy changes and projects in our community. And that's why we say people empowering projects. We have the stories, what they tell, we have the data collective. We take that to the committee meetings and say, this is where our priorities as community members need to go. Here's the data behind it. And here we are to say it.
Amazing. And yeah, actually, Healthy Gulf has done some outreach in upriver of folks who have been posting about pollution, water quality issues, air quality issues. And then you look and see like all of our trash in our streets. So we just had last week this incredible presentation on recycling and waste. And you're like, wow, it makes me so frustrated to see all these issues upstream and then all the results downstream, and seeing those two kinds of data posts just juxtapositioned to each other. It makes you just like want to nail that circular economy. So thanks to Healthy Gulf for being such a great data partner. Yeah, we love working with you guys. And CVNO too. All right. Well, we're going to be sending out, Caroline, thank you again for doing such a good job. We're going to be making sure that we record once and play often on these. So we hopefully can get some more eyes on this presentation, but you guys did. Thank you so much for a wonderful, I learned something. I learned a lot, actually. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All right, see y'all next week.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah,
Next
keep
week.
an eye out for follow-ups and share the invitations with your friends and families, and share your transportation stories. We want to see it. We want to hear it. We'll look for it. Thanks, everyone. Sage, I was seeing if we wanted to do a little debrief, but some people.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I could go ahead and take care of that. Some people, I don't want to report.
Thank you guys if you're still there. We're just gonna wind the meeting up right now.
Yeah. Oh, so they're trying to get me to report. Okay, let me just talk. I didn't want to report on like this report screen is up, and I don't want to do that. Let me see if I get rid of this screen.
I think you can. If you want to make me host, I think I know.
Is it remove? I got it. Okay. I need remove. I got it. Remove. Report to Zoom. Don't report to Zoom. Just remove. There we go. All right. Hey.
Also, I don't know if you can hear, but someone just started playing like music.